Welcome back, everyone, to the interviews for physio students and new grads. Today's interview is with Khalid Maidan of Clinical Physio. So, as always, grab that comfy chair, a notebook and pen, and enjoy the interview. Okay, hello everybody and welcome back to the interviews. We are very lucky to have with us today Khalid Maidan from Clinical Physio. Khalid, as I've said before, has been qualified for 12 years now. He graduated from the University of East Anglia with physiotherapy and has gone on to have a career in MSK specifically, now working as a Band 7 specialist, doing some fantastic things in A&E of all places, as well as his physiotherapy MSK specialist practice and clinics. So today, welcome Khalid.
Thank you so much, James. Pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for giving up your time. You've been an incredibly busy man recently, as we all have seen on social media, webinars and whatnot. So it's been brilliant.
No, thank you so much. I suppose with everything clinical physio related, we said when we went into lockdown that we needed to step up and take this opportunity to actually help the people who follow us. And yeah, thankfully the response has been great. So we're very grateful for all that.
I know for a fact from a lot of my peers, physiotherapy students, they're also very thankful to yourself for all the hard work that I know goes into creating some of the content that you have. And I suppose actually it's really worth off the bat here, just kind of saying that Clinical Physio, actually you started that in 2014, am I right?
Yeah, we started a lot. So there's this, would you like me to tell you the story quickly?
Go for it. Yeah, why not? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So it started a little while ago. There's three members of Clinical Physio. There's myself, there's Phil Richards, and there's Dr. Jack Hurley. So I started working with Phil in 2013 when he actually interviewed me and said, yes, he'll do. When we were both working in the NHS in Cambridgeshire. And it was around about that kind of time that both of us were going on individual courses. Phil was a Band 6 at that stage, so he was a bit more progressed, but I was still a very early Band 5. And so I was going on courses and kind of realizing that everything that I was trying to gain from courses, I wasn't gaining, probably because the level of the teaching was probably aimed at people higher than me. It was always aimed at 6s and 7s, and I kind of thought, I'm not really gaining anything from this, and it made me very disheartened and not want to do as much CPD, and thought, right, I'm not supposed to go on courses at the moment. That's not the right thing for me to do because I'm not experienced enough. So I remember having a chat with Phil saying, look, maybe we should do something in the future that's more aligned with students and juniors who are really keen and really want to get into CPD but don't know where to start. And he said, yeah, that sounds like an awesome idea. So then Jack is Phil's best friend from university, so he came on board with all his editing experience, and so we kind of started from 2014 onwards doing all the filming for all the videos, which, as you said, is takes a long time. It took us a good 3-4 years to get all the filming done and about a year to edit it. And then once we actually managed to get that out there, then we said, right, we better step up to the next level, which is where we've kind of taken more of the day-to-day education that you see through the various channels. So yeah, that's kind of Clinical Physio in a nutshell.
Wow, I think that's probably really interesting for a lot of people to hear, because I think talking for the student nation, I mean, we see this sort of the surface of what goes on, we see the end product, and it's really quite good to hear that actually it's a product that has taken that long to come up with and to produce, because it's very easy for people to see what comes out and not necessarily know how much goes into these things. So
yeah, really good point. And I hope that if anyone in the physio world wants to do something similar in the future, go for it, and remember that it won't work in 6 months. If in 6 months you're you don't have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people following you on Instagram, it doesn't matter. It took us about 7 years. So don't worry, basically.
I think I was having a conversation just yesterday with another student who wants to start doing sort of a little bit some of the things I'm doing and maybe a student vlog. And one of the things I said is never ever look at how many followers you've got or chase the followers. Just get good content out there, and that will come. So it's
spot on. Yeah, spot on. Great advice. That's
brilliant.
another interview in itself, all of that.
I think it probably is.
Fun, it's great fun. It is great fun.
Write that down. So I think we'll start by taking you back. First of all, actually, very quickly, I want to thank everyone who has sent in questions, because I knew we'd have a lot, and both myself and you had received questions from everyone, students, band fives, and alike. And I just want to say a big thank you, because like I've said in all of my other things, I can't do this without the input of people who this is aimed at. So it makes it relevant for everyone watching. So thank you. Okay, so the first one was looking at you as a student. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to just go back to that point in your mind.
Yeah, it takes a long time. No, it's so long ago. But no, there's parts of my brain that still remembers it. Don't worry.
That's good then. That's good. So really, this one was looking at what you found most challenging as a student. I think it's a really good one for people to hear.
Yeah, certainly. So I started studying in 2005. So in 2005, there was no Instagram. There wasn't really a Twitter. There was a Facebook, but Facebook was very much seen as a cool thing. You know, you don't study on Facebook, or you don't get education on Facebook. So the level of resources that you have at your disposal these days weren't around. And of course, you know, these days everyone talks about reading articles, and of course that's really, really important. But I think in a similar way that I was explaining a second ago with James and the courses, I often used to feel as a student that reading articles sometimes went over my head. And I think you kind of read an article and it takes you an hour as a student, whereas it might take you a lot quicker when you're more established and you can skim read but still take it in, whereas as a student you're kind of reading every single line. So I think that there wasn't, and there certainly wasn't all the videos that we have these days that are out there. And that's, again, one of the key reasons that we developed the videos that we have on Clinical Physio, because we knew that when we were studying, there wasn't that kind of education. So I think the resources were very different. There was a lot of book reading, and I'm sure there still is a lot of book reading, but I suppose book reading took up the vast majority of information, whereas these days there's a lot more information out there, which is great. I think it's really important for me to say that, like everyone, I struggled with placements. You know, placements are tough. Looking back on it, 13, 14, 15 years ago, it's understandable that students these days have challenges with placements, because I had the same challenges. And please don't think that because I'm a band 7 now that means I aced all my my placements, because I certainly didn't. And I suppose the idea is that I think we often forget, and I hope that educators don't forget, that the key part of placement is learning, not passing. It's learning. Yeah. And I certainly found that as a student, all you were thinking about is I need to pass, I need not to fail, I need to get a first, I need to get a 2-1, and the learning comes second to that, which is a really tough mindset to get out of, but nevertheless I think that's one I had. I think those are some of the key things. My course was very heavily essay based, which is not me. I'm more of a maths and science guy than an English lit guy. So I was, I wanted exams, I wanted practical exams, I wanted theory exams, but a lot of ours was essay based, and I think I struggled with that too. But at the end of the day, I suppose I got out of it what I needed to. And as one of the questions we're going to touch upon later goes into, I think I did a lot more learning as a band 5 than I did as a student. And I wouldn't be afraid of that if you are coming to the end of your degree thinking, I don't think I know much. That's okay, nor did I. And when you get out there and you do your first 2 years as a qualified practitioner, you're effectively in the deep end. And as a result, it's natural that you will learn a lot more. So I think those are some of the key things that I remember as a student.
Yeah, definitely. You've just taken me back to my first degree, and I just remember there not being all of the resources. I don't think there was even such thing as PubMed and that sort of stuff when I did my
Yeah,
first, and
sure.
it was
What's your first degree, James?
biology.
Oh, right,
Um,
okay.
so I graduated in that when you started your physio, actually. So
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, I remember using all sorts of. There was a few computers in the library. That
Sure.
was what it was like, and it was, yeah. So I definitely empathise with you on that one. And big changes that have happened in the last 15 years or so, hasn't there? So been
Yeah,
massive.
absolutely.
So then you kind of went on. Obviously, you took it into your rotations now, and I do
Mm.
remember talking to you previously and saying you actually graduated at the time when there were few NHS jobs out there,
Yeah,
and it was quite
absolutely.
hard. But you managed to find your NHS rotations eventually.
Yeah, so that's probably tip two. If you're doing interviews at the moment and you don't get one, don't worry, because I think it took me 9 interviews before I got my first job.
Wow. Yeah.
And it wasn't an NHS job. It was working for an occupational health company, whereby I think I was one of 2 people being interviewed, whereas in the NHS it would have been a whole day full of interviews. I remember doing a group interview with about 30 people down in somewhere in Kent, and looking at all these people and thinking, wow, these guys are all really good and they've probably gone through the same application that I have. So that's certainly one thing. Don't worry if you don't get a job straight away. It absolutely will happen. So yeah, first I worked as an HR assistant
Mm.
because I couldn't get a physio job. It took about 8 months after qualifying to get my first physio job. And then I spent 18 months there doing the occupational health. And then I went to Basildon and Thurrock University Hospital to do my NHS rotations between 2010 and 2013.
Brilliant. And that leads lovely on to the question we've got about sort of your best and worst bits of rotations, really. So what did you
Yeah.
find
Yeah, I mean,
not so
it's
good?
funny actually. Taking me back, that just as you were talking through that question, it suddenly takes you all back to all the different parts of it, and I think that it's exciting. It's fun. You're part of the cool kids because you just all started at the same time, and things like that. And I remember being part of the cool kids in the staff room and things like that. My first day, and I'm sure I don't know, actually, maybe it doesn't happen so much these days because I don't. Unfortunately, I don't work. I still work in outpatients in the NHS, but I don't work on inpatients. But certainly, when I started, my first day on inpatients was, right, here's your ward, off you go. And it was me and a fantastic physio assistant called Tim Nairn. I hope you're well, Tim, if you ever get to hear this. And it was his first week too. So we just started on this brand new ward, and the ward round was at 9 o'clock. And I remember us kind of thinking, oh my God, the consultants at 9 o'clock, consultants going to be there, all the doctors are going to be there, all the nurses are going to be there, kind of saying what's happening with this physio patient, what's happening with this physio patient. And again, just I hope to highlight to people and reassure them that happened to us years ago, and you still learn and grow from it. So I when I was doing I started my degree, let alone my jobs. I started my degree saying, and my background is I grew up in the Middle East in Bahrain, which is where my dad's side of the family is from. And I always grew up saying, I'm going to go to university in the UK, I'm going to do 3 years, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to spend the rest of my life in Bahrain. And here I am 15 years later.
Yeah.
But as a result, at that stage, I always thought MSK, MSK, MSK. So I obviously did my MSK rotation with a little bit more motivation, but I really enjoyed respiratory as well. I enjoyed ITU. I enjoyed working on the acute respiratory ward, which happened to be my ward, which was great fun. And I think, again, as band fives, there's still a lot of learning that takes place beyond university, and it's more focused learning because it's happening there and then. You don't get time to take 2 hours for lunch and go and read about it and come back. The patient's there. You've got to see them, and it's a busy ward and all that kind of stuff. So it's tough at the time, but you learn loads just by doing that. Certainly take the supervision sessions with your band 6s or your band 7, and make sure that you tell them if you're not sure or if things are not going so well, and make sure that you get the support that you need, because it is a challenging time. Don't worry, you will get to the other side in a much better place, but that doesn't mean it's not normal to find it challenging along the way.
Yeah, definitely. What was your favorite bit of doing on the rotations? Can you remember anything that sort of particularly stands out as being something you thought, I really...
Yeah, I think the thing that I remember the most is before my MSK rotation, and it's because I did occupational health for 18 months, and that's effectively MSK. And then I did my first rotation was 7 months on elderly care. Then I did respiratory for 4 months, and so it was a full year before I did my first MSK rotation.
Okay.
And I remember being up all night the night before starting, thinking, I don't know what I'm doing, even though I had done it for 12 months in occupational health. And so I think one of the best things is once you do, I was lucky enough to do 3 MSK rotations as a band 5, and then after that at Basildon, I went to Cambridgeshire and did 9 months as a static band 5. So I did a lot of MSK band 5, and towards the end of that time, you remember that first night when you couldn't sleep, and it was also difficult. And there's a really natural feeling that I'm sure that lots of people watching this will probably get, where they want to. There's a continuum that talks about competency and confidence. Sorry, competency and consciousness. So the idea is that everyone wants to get to the stage where they are unconsciously competent, which means that they are competent without having to think about it. It just, everything's in your brain. You've done it a million times. You just want to get it out there. And I remember kind of being an early band 5 thinking, God, I really want to get to that stage where I'm unconsciously brilliant. And it takes, I can't tell you, it absolutely didn't happen whilst I was still a band 5. It probably happened at some point in the last, 2 years, where I kind of thought to myself, right, I'm now unconsciously competent. And I suppose remember those tough times, because later down the line, you do actually get the chance to reflect on it and realize you did something good.
Definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably one of the key things that I took away from being a band 5 in MSK.
I think that's great, because I know you have it in university when you're doing placements, where you get to that point where you're about to come to a setting that you haven't studied or been in for potentially over a year, and you're thinking, I can't remember a single thing. What's a knee?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so it's quite nice to hear that actually, you do get that dread, but it works out okay in the end.
Oh, 100%. And by the way, I did, as I said, I did 3 MSK rotations, even between the first rotation and then doing, so if I did my first MSK rotation in 2011, it would have been, when I did my second MSK rotation in 2012, I still thought that I'd forgotten everything in between.
Yeah.
So that's normal too. Even if you've done a full 4-5 months on MSK and then you come back, or whatever it might be, respiratory, neurology, whatever floats your boat. Don't worry. That's a normal feeling. Yeah. It's absolutely fine if you feel that way.
No, then that's great to hear. That's really good to hear. So then we start taking you through into being qualified. So, and being kind of going into being more experienced, which is fab. And then our question is currently where you are now, what's your favorite thing? And I'm going to split this a little bit, actually. I'm going to favorite thing in physio, and then favorite part of being in this education influencing field that you're also in.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That's a nice question to be able to answer, I suppose. So my favorite part, so day to day, I still work in the NHS. I work as a band 7 specialist physiotherapist. I'm MSK. In my hospital department, I'm the lower limb clinical lead, which means that naturally I have a much more of an affinity with hips and knees and ankles than elbows and wrists. But don't get me wrong, I still have to see the occasional shoulder and wrist patient from time to time. So there I do there's two really cool things that I'm really lucky to do as part of my job. Number one is, as you mentioned earlier, I get to work in A&E. So three, yeah, it would have been 2-3 years ago now that I did a solid 3-month stint working as a first contact practitioner, effectively in A&E. So people injuring themselves there and then the first person that they see is me. So that was a really fun thing to do. What I do now is an emergency department follow-up clinic. So someone plays football on Saturday, injures their knee, they go to A&E on day 0 and they see a doctor or they see a nurse, and the doctor and nurse does the x-ray and does their basic assessment and examination and gives them their emergency care. And then a week later, they come to see me. And at that stage, my role is twofold. My first role is diagnosis. So it's up to me at that point to diagnose the ACL injury, to diagnose the meniscal tear, or if there hasn't been an x-ray, to double check that there's not a fracture. So that's my first part in that role. And then my second role is management or treatment. So that management can either be a simple one saying, no, don't worry, I don't think you've done anything serious, which is great news. Here's some basic advice, here's the crutches, here's some gait re-education, and now we're going to refer you to physiotherapy so you can continue their care with them. Or my management is, I'm really sorry, I think you have torn your ACL. There's suspicions doing my testing that you might have done so in keeping with your history, and therefore as a result, I think we need to discuss your care with an orthopedic surgeon, so I'm going to refer you to see the surgeon. So that in a small part is my A&E job, and then I then get to work with the knee orthopedic consultant. I suppose it makes sense that I'm one of the lower limb clinical leads, because the orthopedic consultant that I get to work with is a knee surgeon. And so it's great because I have some good links with him, and he understands how I think, and I suppose I've got to learn how he thinks over a period of time. And so therefore I'll see new patients in his clinic. I will see if patients then go on to have surgery, then I'll get to see them post-op. And there's it's quite interesting. There's a difference between being a physiotherapy department physiotherapist and being an orthopedic consultant's physiotherapist. As an orthopedic consultant physiotherapist, you almost have to think with a consultant head on, i.e. not what exercises are we going to give you, it's more like, what are we going to do in the grand scheme of things? Are you a candidate for surgery? Are you a candidate for rehab? Are you a candidate to see a different specialist and things like that? So those are some of the fun things that I get to do in my day job. But I have to be honest that the favorite thing that I'm enjoying about physio life at the moment is definitely the latter half of what you said, being involved in education with everything that we do with clinical physio. And I think the first thing I would say on that point is that if there's something within the physio world that you want to try and get stuck into that isn't clinical practice, whether it be setting up a new clinic, whether it be health promotion, whether it be doing something like education, go for it, because you'll never know how great it is, or you'll never know how you truly feel about it until you actually dive into it and do it. And there's so many people that I say, oh, it could have been good to do that sometime, and they never actually get to do it, and they never get to experience how it feels. And without a doubt, the best thing about clinical physio is, number one, being able to teach, because I didn't realize quite how much I love it, but I totally do, whether it be the webinars or the day courses that we run. When you actually get to, someone walks into a day course and says, oh, I'm really glad to be here because I really don't know much about back pain. Mm-hmm. And then when the end of it, they come up to you and say, oh, thank you so much. That makes so much sense. It's incredibly, it's incredibly rewarding. And just seeing people and the questions that they ask, and them understanding that answer and feeling confident in the result. And I tend to keep in touch with a lot of the students that have come on courses. And I suppose it's just a sign of how much I love it that I still remember them all by name. I'm sure if I saw them in the street, I'd say, yeah, I know who that is, because they've been on a course. And I suppose that's just a sign that much you enjoy it. But they'll then send me a message saying, oh, I had a patient who did this because of, I learned it from what we did on the course, and that really made a lot of sense. So without a doubt, that is. And I've got to say that going around all the universities doing the courses we're doing at the moment, I'm incredibly impressed by the level of knowledge that so many students have compared to when I was a student, and standards just seem to be so much higher in terms of student knowledge. So congratulations to all you guys, and I hope that it's a demonstration that you're really taking resources from social media, from the internet, and these things which are so much more accessible, because there's some really outstanding students out there. So yeah.
Wow, that's a good one to hear. That's great. So
even involved with everything you're doing, James, there's no I don't think that as a graduating third year that I would have had the level of confidence to go and speak to some of the people you're speaking to, and I think that goes hand in hand with the amount of learning that you've done and the amount of knowledge that you have, that you feel so confident doing that. So no, absolutely, kudos to you as well, my friend.
Thank you. I think, one thing to put my 2 pence worth in, I think the reason I've been able to do that is because I feel that physio as a community is just, I've worked in a lot of industries in my previous careers, and I've never come across one that is so on board with each other, so supportive of each other, and so wanting to help build people up and not knock each other down. And I think it's that's what's made these interviews possible, because you don't fear approaching big names, because actually the response you get is great. And so, likewise from yourself.
Thank you. That's kind of, but I completely agree with you that there is such a community that's grown now. And I think that's because of the way that, physios have always been people persons, as I was going to say. But of course it goes with the job role, but that has transformed onto social media as well, and you see so many people saying, oh, congratulations on this, congratulations on that. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of opinion on social media, and I think it's important for me to say that when I was younger, when clinical physio was in its infancy, we often felt apprehensive about putting our opinion out there, because there's so many people, it doesn't have to be physios, it's health professionals in general, whether they be doctors, surgeons, chiropractors, osteopaths, podiatrists, reflexologists, radiologists, it doesn't matter. There's so many people who will naturally be proud of their own thoughts and their own opinions, and they're very willing to challenge you on it. And social media can seem like a very intense environment to be challenged on, because naturally everyone can see it. You say A, and someone with a big following says B, and suddenly all of Twitter has seen it. And I suppose if there's an extra piece of advice, having been in that kind of position where you feel apprehensive about putting stuff out, is just be confident in what your opinion is, and if it's backed up, and if you've got justification for it, then don't be afraid to be positive in that opinion, and don't afraid to put those opinions out there, because you have a lot to share with people, and it will help other people by putting that content out. But yeah, I certainly appreciate what you're saying about the concept of a community, and how the physio world is very interlinked, which is fabulous.
Yeah, everyone seems to know everyone, which
they do.
It's always a good thing.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's amazing how many physios from the other side of the country say, oh yeah, I think I worked with someone. I remember doing one of the courses we did, and it was up in Manchester, and the young lady there said, oh yeah, I used to work where you work now, do you know this person? Of course I know that person. And yeah, it just goes around the country.
And back to kind of what you've talked about in terms of the change that we've seen with social media and that connectivity, is one thing I think is just, it still blows my mind, is that when after doing these sorts of things, I get messages and stuff, and I find out that they're from Canada or they're from Australia. Yeah. I just think it's
mind blowing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
It is. We had that with all of our YouTube stuff. It was within the first year that we kind of thought, oh, a couple of people might watch these videos. and we couldn't believe it when people in
Yeah.
South America are watching them, and then people in USA are watching, and people in Australia are watching, and as you said, you'll absolutely experience that too. And it just goes to show, as you said, how much of a global community it is. It's fabulous.
It is, yeah, making a large world feel nice and small and cozy. So, kind of back onto the education one, and this is an interesting question that's come in. It's from a very experienced physio,
Okay.
and it's about sort of you've been around to lots of universities and running some of your courses. Is there anything that you think that you see as an important change going forward with the a university degree?
Yeah, great question. Really great question, and I think it's a question that we effectively need to ask ourselves as a physiotherapy world in the UK, if we are going to progress as a profession, because you know, people coming out of university are the future, of course. And I think that there's there is a responsibility for practitioners, and lots of practitioners take students, which is fabulous, and you're adding to that responsibility. But I think there's also a responsibility to try and do what we can to shape the learning where possible. Now, I certainly don't want to offend any lecturers or offend any universities when I say this, but I know that certainly when I was studying, we did a lot of Maitland-Mobes when I was studying between 2005 and 2008, and I think we found and a lot of our MSK training was based on Maitland-Mobes, and even back then, Maitland-Mobes were absolutely fading out of their presence in practice. But that was the stuff that we were being taught, and I think that, you know, we were always told, oh, this is really great for your handling, and it's really good to practice your practical skills and things like that, which is true. But if you're not going to be able to go out into practice and then use the Maitland-Mobes, then you're using practical skills and handling skills at university that you're not going to be able to translate.
Right.
I would much rather that someone developed really good handling by doing an anterior draw test for the ACL, or doing a Lachman's test for the ACL as how to develop handling. And so one of the things that I've always thought of is, and it might be that lots of universities do this at the moment, and if they do, then hats off to you, is to see if we can coordinate more with people who are physios who are in practice at the moment, and whether it be a case of going down to the local hospital every, 3 months and having a meeting to say, this is what we're teaching in the respiratory module. Is this still the kind of stuff that you're doing these days? Oh yes, absolutely it is. And by the way, we've, the new piece of evidence coming out from Australia is that we're doing this as well. Okay, great. Maybe that's something we should look at for next year. And I suppose it's more cohesion between the two. And because I think that I've spoken to a lot of practitioners who say, oh, well, that kind of happens anyway, because, we teach the students, and then the students go back to the university, and then they tell the lecturers, but that doesn't always happen.
No.
And so I think for me, more of a joined up approach for lecturers and practice to be able to work together, to be able to create a coordinated syllabus, as it were. I think that it's natural that lots of lecturers are no longer practicing, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because, as we said, you don't get to see what is happening in the field necessarily, but it's a really good thing because you get to spend so much more time with your students, and you get to focus more on the research and the really important parts of education, which is support for students who might really be struggling, and doing one-to-one sessions and doing supervision, and that's so vital, and it's so important that you get to do that. But I just wonder if that kind of link is something that might be missing. I think the other thing, the manual therapy box is still a box that some people are opening to see what's inside, and some people are saying you need to lock the key and throw it away, in terms of manual therapy. And again, it's that kind of thing that we need to discuss. Well, is the evidence there? Is it still beneficial? And if so, should we be teaching it? But I do appreciate that at the same time that we are aiming to develop autonomous practitioners when students graduate. And so is it better to give them all the tools and for students to make their own mind up of, actually, well, I've learned about all the different tools. I personally don't like that one, and I do like that one, and the evidence is supporting that one, and the evidence doesn't support that one, and therefore these are the tools that I'm going to take forward. So I think that there is a real balance there of, do we teach students everything and allow them to be autonomous practitioners to be able to direct their practice in the way that they want, versus the balance of, well, that's not evidence-based, so we shouldn't be teaching it anymore. I had when I was a student, ultrasound was going out of fashion, and I think there are still students who ask me about ultrasound settings at times, and that was 15 years ago when I was studying. So there's still an element of things that are being taught which are perhaps not evidence-based, and it's a real question as to whether we should still be teaching students those things or not. It's a tough one.
I suppose in a way, it's listening to you talk there, it's almost like, when do you draw the line at stopping teaching something?
Absolutely. It is a difficult one, and I imagine that's where my thought process of regular meetings between universities and local trusts might allow them to shape that picture, because it's at the detriment to the students who then go out on placement. And it's such a natural question that people say, I'm about to start my placement in MSK, what shall I learn? And okay, well, we've done electrotherapy, we've done ultrasound, we've done shortwave, we've done TENS, we've done interferential stimulation. I'm going to learn all the settings for all of those different things. And then they go on placement and they think, I did all that learning and I'm never going to use it. So it's at the detriment to the students to do the learning that they think is going to get them there, but then unfortunately it doesn't happen. So I hope that an opportunity for that kind of joined up approach might help both sides of the coin. It helps the lecturers to be able to give the students what they need. It helps the students to be able to learn the things that are actually going on in the world. And then when they therefore go into their rotations, respiratory, neurology, orthopedics, MSK, community, whatever, the employers are kind of thinking, that the trusts are kind of thinking, great, the students are actually learning what we are practicing, rather than something that went out of fashion 5 years ago.
I think that's a really interesting slant on it, actually. When I saw that question come in, there's certain things that are sort of quite common and quite you hear an awful lot about change in education. I think you've come at it at a slightly different angle that it's certainly got me thinking about it a bit now as well. So
I hope so. Maybe it's up to us as the practitioners to try and create that change, and try and approach universities and say, look, this is something we thought that was a good idea. We're willing to do it. Would you be interested in having us? Maybe it's our responsibility to try and put ourselves out there and do that.
I think, I mean,
without treading on toes and offending, because I realise that it's so easy for someone like me as a practitioner to say, why don't you just have a look at what we're doing at the moment? That's a very naive head, and I realise that it's a very that it can certainly cause offence, and it can cause defensism. So I understand it.
It's looking, I think the key thing though from a student's point of view, looking at it kind of up, I just see both parties have one thing in mind, and that is making students autonomous, self-sufficient practitioners, and also current and evidence-based. And that's, so there's a common goal there. And at the moment I'm doing a module on interprofessional working, and one of the key things that's coming out of that is you can't have an effective team, you can't have effective interprofessional working if you haven't got a common goal and you're not working towards a common goal. But in essence, both practitioners and lecturers are working for a common goal. So it's finding a way of bringing that together. And I know at my university, so I'm at the University of Plymouth, and I know that there does, from a student, it appear to be a really good, close connection with the local hospital, with some lecturers working, as you said, sort of still doing some clinical and bringing that in and feeding that in. But in certain areas, maybe it doesn't happen enough. And I think MSK always comes out, doesn't it? Always comes out as the big one, because we've got this manual therapy and a debate and going on and stuff. It seems to always be highlighted more.
Yeah, certainly. And I know that sorry, James, you may have cut out there a second. I know that lots of universities, are bringing in guest lecturers to perhaps
Yeah.
add to that. But no, it's great to hear that down in the southwest that there is still that link between practice and study.
Interesting, really interesting point. That, yeah. So, wow. Okay, so this is what I love about these interviews. It comes out and generates some really good thoughts and conversation. So this is a great one, and I know you've had this one already, which I think is probably a good thing because it's something for you to ponder. Is someone's asked a really poignant question: is where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Okay, where do I see myself? Yeah, I'll be totally honest. I think I highlighted it a second ago. Is that I'm absolutely passionate about my involvement in the education sphere, as it were, at the moment. And don't get me wrong, I don't compare myself to lecturers in any way. They do an outstanding job, and in many ways, I actually think that their job is even more difficult because you're trying to teach someone from 0 to 1, whereas I'm just teaching them from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. They're doing the very foundations, which often is the tough bit. But I hope to see myself going into doing more clinical physio. I hope that in 5 years' time, I'm doing a couple of days a week clinical, and I still think that I would need to still do clinical to back up what we've just been talking about.
Yep.
I don't want to, if I don't want to be in a position where I stop doing anything clinical and therefore I lose the up-to-date, the what's happening in the world now, what's happening currently. So I'd still love to be doing that 2 days a week. But then I'd love to be doing 3, 4, 5 days a week doing clinical physio, whether that means doing more webinars, whether it means doing more courses, whether it just being able to produce more content and more videos perhaps, or and things like that, because there's such a I personally get such a buzz from doing the education side of things. So I hope I can integrate that a bit more in the future.
I think that's probably going to be news to a lot of our ears to know that it's going to be continuing, because that is another thing. Actually, we do see these things pop up occasionally, and it's having that consistency of it carrying on for forever. And I think that's great that's where you see it going, which is, I think that's brilliant, because it
needs to be consistent. And if I can hopefully add a tip for anyone who's kind of in a position where they feel like they want to do something different with physio, and as I was saying earlier, the answer is absolutely go for it. I'm a person who I think it's really important to have options. I think that when you feel like you're forced into one direction and that's the only direction you've got in front of you, that you feel trapped at times, and if you're not enjoying it, then what? I think that having multiple options is really important, and it might be that there are times when you turn up this dial and you turn down that dial, and then a year later you might be turning that one back up and this one's going back down again. But to be able to have those options, number one, keeps things fresh, and they say variety is the spice of life, but also it allows you to keep that motivation and stay motivated in what you do. Because I think that if someone suddenly said, oh, you're not allowed to do anything educational anymore, I'd lose a lot of motivation because I enjoy it so much. And if I suddenly had to stop doing the thing that I found most enjoyable, then it would certainly have an effect.
And the beauty of physiotherapy is it does lend itself to having options and choice, because there is just a huge array of possibilities of what you can do with physiotherapy. I mean, I don't think there's a month goes by that I don't find out something new that people do with the qualification. So I think it's encouraging massively.
Fabulous.
So with that online stuff, you're doing the learning and everything, I've had a really good question coming in about advice on keeping up with CPD, because, and this is for me quite an important one. We've had chat about this before, about making sure we cover this today, because there is an awful lot of online courses and learning opportunities out there. And at the moment, especially where we're currently going through the situation of COVID and having maybe a bit more time, we're seeing a lot of our peers doing lots and lots and lots and lots. What's your advice for students who are maybe feeling that there's a fear of missing out, that I'm seeing everyone doing all these courses, I can't keep up, or should I be doing this and should I be doing? What's your advice for those people?
Yeah, it's a really fabulous question, and I hope I can. Whoever asked this question, thank you so much for bringing this question, because it takes a lot of courage to ask a question like that, because I think if the person who asked the questions doesn't mind me reading between the lines, I think there's definitely a question of fear in where you're coming from. And I imagine that position of fear, as you alluded to a second ago, James, is number one, there's a lot of stuff out there. But number two, and perhaps the place that my mind jumps to when I read that question, is that other students are doing so much. And to me, that demonstrates that there's a fear of comparison, in that everyone else is doing so much and I'm not doing enough, and surely this is going to create a problem for me. I was having this discussion with a lady called Katie, who's a fantastic physio up in Glasgow. Her Instagram is @themedicalphysio, so certainly check her out. And she highlighted that comparison is the thief of joy, and it absolutely is. And I off the top of my head, I don't know who said that quote out loud, but I've 100% heard it before. And so I suppose the answer I would give is, when I was a student, there wasn't any resources like this, and I still turned out fine, if I may say so. So therefore, if you happen to not be able to do any of that learning, it's okay. And I hope I'm some kind of evidence of that. But at the same time, if you do really want to get involved in it, fantastic, brilliant, go for it. Do it because it's for you. It's not to be able to keep up with standards. It's not to be able to keep up with Rebecca, who's done this much learning. It's not to be able to be top of the number of webinars seen by classmates kind of thing. It's not so that you can tell everyone on Twitter that you've done 55 webinars this week. It's for you.
Yeah.
And so do it for that reason. And I can, if I bring my personal experience to it, not only as a student, but even in the last 5-6 years, probably about 6-7 years ago is when physio podcasts really started happening. And I was trying to listen to those podcasts and thinking that I was motivated to listen to them, but I had a different reason to be motivated. So when I was motivated back then, it was more of a pressure. It was more of a pressure on myself, thinking that if I don't do this, if I don't listen to these podcasts, if I don't follow the videos that are coming out, then I'm going to fall behind and it's not going to go well. So it was a negative reason for listening to all those podcasts, and my motivation was very different. Whereas now, or within the last 3 years, I've been doing a lot more podcasts, and I've been doing a lot more videos and watching incredible physiotherapists like Joe Gibson on the shoulder and things like that. And the reason behind it is so that I can influence my education more, so that I can provide to everyone on our education channel with better content.
Yeah.
And so the reason for you doing that learning, or watching those webinars, or watching that video, or listening to that podcast will change. And I found that I was a lot more engaged the second time round, because there was a much more positive reason for listening to all that stuff, rather than negative reason of, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to be able to keep up with James Armstrong, who does loads of webinars and listens to loads of podcasts. So make sure it's coming from a place of positivity that you're trying to do those things. And if it's not coming from a place of positivity, don't worry. Try and find out if there is a reason that you have a genuine, emotion behind doing those things, and hopefully that will take you through. So hopefully that's the first half of that question. Coming on to what you should be looking at. For me, it's absolutely relevant to what you want to learn. My partner Marie is also a physio, and she was saying yesterday actually that she's been doing a lot of podcasts and learning, and she's been in recent times, she's been doing a lot on brachial plexus stuff, because she did a brachial plexus teaching at work, and so she's been looking at a lot of those webinars. She's whereas I'm more lower limb, she's more upper limb within MSK, and so she's been looking at a lot of upper limb lectures from orthopedics and things like that. So do or look at the stuff that's relevant to you. You know, if you with all the love in the world to my colleagues in neurology, if you told me there's a webinar on stroke next week, I don't think I would be watching it. And that's not because I don't value what you do. It's because it's not relevant. It's not relevant. It's not something that I love and associate with. And so pick the things that are most relevant to you. Pick if there's 3 different webinars on Twitter and one of them doesn't really appeal to you, the other one's kind of, I could watch that if I really wanted to, and the other one was, that sounds fantastic, then go for that one. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in saying, actually, I don't think I'm going to watch this one this week, because guess what? There'll probably be another one in 2 months' time where you can watch it if you really want to. So don't worry about not doing 15 webinars a week. If there is one for you, that's the one that you should jump on. And by the way, don't worry if you miss that, because it might come up next week. And I think we had this conversation the other week, James, when we did the clinical physio interview, that that time at the moment is so different for so many people. And we had an amazing girl, didn't we, called Robin, who was on the chat, and she was saying that her life is completely upside down, and she's so sociable, and she loves meeting people, and she loves studying with people, and she can't have any of that at the moment. So it's natural that if all your world is turned upside down, that you are less productive or less efficient or less enthusiastic, dare I say, for those things. So don't worry if that's the case. And then the final thing I've kind of written down here in terms of CPD is that we're kind of told to do CPD for 2 reasons. Number one is to meet standards from the CSP and to meet standards from the HCPC. But the second reason for doing CPD is to satisfy yourself and to enhance the learning that you want to do, and to feel better in yourself, not feel worse in yourself because you didn't listen to it, to feel better in yourself for doing that CPD. So if you're struggling, then focus on the latter. Focus on doing the learning that satisfies you, not the learning that satisfies the CSP and the HCPC so much.
Definitely. Well, it's brilliant. I don't think there's anything to add to that at all. I think it's great. And I think that's probably put a lot of people at ease, because, you know, I think it's an easy trap, isn't it? We fall into it in everyday life. And social media is, I do think, that is a driving force with this fear of missing out and comparison. And as you so rightly said there, I've just recently done a video on placements, and I said in there, never compare yourself to what other people are doing, because apart from anything else, you don't actually know that they are really doing it. It's easy to put a screenshot of something. You know?
Yeah, it's really fair.
So, keep focused on what's right for you. That's great.
100%.
Now, I think it kind of carries on from this, and it may well be quite similar.
Please.
This question, I'm going to read it as it's written, because it's so nicely put, actually. In a world of ever-growing knowledge, what advice would you give for new graduates in terms of skills and knowledge we should have when entering as a Band 5? I just like the beginning of that question.
Great question. And it is an ever-growing world. And as I alluded to earlier, the level of knowledge that students have these days, when I compare it to my genuine self when I was a student, it's streets higher. And if I may say myself, I've turned out okay. So that's the first thing to remember. You absolutely will as well. So you're certainly not going to fall behind. But I think the other thing is that this was absolutely true for me. And I know we mentioned it earlier, James, that I personally did a lot more learning in my first 2 years as a Band 5 physiotherapist. And I probably retained a lot more information compared to my time as a student. And that's not because the teaching I had wasn't good, because it was fantastic. But there's a different demand when you're learning as a Band 5. You learn based on pressure, you learn based on repetition, because of course you're effectively on a 2-year placement in a variety of sectors, and therefore you learn through repetition, you learn through experience, you learn from day to day improvement, and I learned so much as a Band 5. I'll give you an example. I'll never forget my worst student placement. I say it was my worst, nothing to do with the hospital, but it was me. I was rubbish on my respiratory placement. Rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. And I think it was because I wasn't motivated, and because I didn't believe that I was going to be a respiratory physio in the future, and I didn't think I knew enough, and I thought it was too hard, and I thought it was too difficult. So I say naturally, that's probably the wrong word. As a consequence, I probably wasn't as diligent in my student learning in respiratory as I could have done. And as a band 5 respiratory, I really enjoyed it. And it was incredible, the difference between, being on placement as a respiratory student and being rubbish. And once I had to do it as my actual job, and I had to learn it because I was running the ward and I was on ITU, and there wasn't an educator asking me, what are you going to do with this patient? You just got to do it. So you learn in such a different way, even to the extent that it can completely change your thinking about a particular discipline of physio, like it did for me, because I really enjoyed respiratory after that. And recently with COVID, I've gone back on ITU after 8 years of being off it. And all those things came flooding back to me, and ABGs and fluid retention and ventilator settings, and all that came flooding back to me. And I thought, actually, this is something that I enjoyed when I was a junior, and I hated it as a student. So I suppose the overall answer there, just to summarize through that waffle, is don't worry. Don't worry if you feel that you don't know anything as coming into band 5, because, as I said, I certainly didn't in so many ways. You will learn so much as a band 5 that it will overtake anything that you need to learn. Remember that as a student, your main role is to learn, not to be amazing. So if you've learned the basics, and the basics is what you take into being band 5, you'll be absolutely fine. And then I suppose the second half of that question is to go back a little bit to what we were saying a second ago, that what should I look at? Look at the stuff that interests you the most. Look at the stuff that you associate with. Look at the stuff that motivates you more than anything, because that's the kind of stuff that's going to bring the best out of you, I suppose, is the best way I can describe it.
Brilliant. Yeah. No, that's great. I think that's fantastic. And that leads nicely on to sort of other resources for an MSK. And this is a band 5 asking this question. So they're currently a band 5. Good resources for to look at in MSK. I mean, I know of one, a clinical something or other, but
that's very kind. Yeah. So that's very kind. So clinical physio. What do we do? We've got head to toe video assessments on all the different joints. That gets broken down into all the different sections. So, for example, we've got a cervical spine section, which is broken down into observation, palpation, active range of movement, passive range of movement, resisted tests. Then we've got the shoulder, exactly the same, observation, palpation. You don't need me to go run through the whole list. That's all on www.clinicalphysio.com. Otherwise, I think look at the people who are so famous on social media, as it were, for want of a better word, because they're all so fantastic at giving back. They're all so fantastic at giving back. They all give out really good resources for free. Some of the iconic names that I've learned from a lot is certainly Joe Gibson in terms of the shoulder, Peter O'Sullivan in terms of the lower back, Seth O'Neill in terms of tendinopathy based stuff, Tom Goom, who you've spoken to, James, of course, the Choose Health, who do the Physio Matters podcast. There's some tremendous podcasts with some incredibly talented and successful and knowledgeable physios, and so certainly have a look at that kind of stuff. I think it's, as you said earlier, James, it's such a massive community, and there's huge kudos for everyone out there who's at the top of their game and providing so much educational resources, because there really is a huge variety of things that you can learn. So I hope those different things help. I suppose that I unfortunately don't have any major links with the Physio Matters podcasts, but I think that the great thing about that resource is that there's so many different it's MSK, but there's so many different varieties. They bring in so many different people to speak to and interview, and all those different people are so brilliant in their game. So yeah, great resource, really great resource.
Definitely, I think I'd agree with that, because if you the Physio Matters podcast, if you look that up, I don't know how many episodes they've got now, but I mean there's over 100, and if you go back, it's just I remember listening to those before I started my degree, because I was just a bit of an eager beaver, and it's there's loads on there, and it's, as you say, the breadth of people who've been interviewed. And also you get to, they do sort of challenge evidence-based and things like that, which is always good. But yeah, I think what's good about those though is you can then go and follow that person and find out a bit more about
certainly
stuff they've done.
Yes,
and it's that active process of learning, isn't it? When you find something or someone who's good, you kind of delve down. It's a bit like reading a journal article, isn't it? You read a research, you'll look at the citations and the reference list, and from that you'll have further learning to go and do in it.
Yeah, certainly. If there's one thing I may say though, and this isn't specific to the Physio Matters podcast, this is specific to everyone, is that don't forget that when I was a band 5, the whole reason we created Clinical Physio is because I was listening to all that stuff, and I was trying to go on those courses, and I felt inadequate. So don't worry if you listen to an amazing, incredibly knowledgeable physiotherapist who's been doing it for 25 years and think to yourself, that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. That's normal. And that is the whole reason that, it's the whole motivation behind why we created what we did, because I felt that way. So don't be worried if you feel the same way. It's not because you're inadequate, it's just the norm. So definitely go and look at all those stuff, but don't worry if it's not don't worry if you don't know the whole thing off by heart by the end of it.
No, that's a really good bit of advice. Yeah, stay grounded to where you are in your current learning journey. So then we had a few questions on this one, which was about job interviews, and I think we're looking at this kind of time of year when people are kind of looking to get jobs and things like that as graduates. But also this video will be around for years to come. So there was two sides of this. Well, a lot of people are asking about interview questions. So what questions might you get asked at interview? General tips about interviews. And then the third thing was extracurricular activity that interviewers look for. So that's But I'll let you dive into that as much as you want to, really.
Yeah, that's fine. So the first thing I'm going to do, which I hope is an interview tip, is if I could ask you to, James, if you don't mind, I'm going to demonstrate this as an interview tip. Can I ask you to ask that question to me again?
Of course.
The whole question. Yeah, the whole question. You can do it quickly if you want, but ask me the whole question again about all the different parts of that question.
So the question is, what interview questions would you say would be good to prepare for as going into as band 5 jobs? What tips in general would you have as an interviewee interviewing for a band 5 job? And finally, what extracurricular activities do you see interviewers looking for in interview?
Okay, now I'm going to answer that question. So hopefully that was a tip in itself. So you probably saw me when you were asking the question, I was doing 1, 2, 3. And I'm trying to categorize in my head there. Question 1 was about what questions are coming up. Question 2 about tips. And question 3 was about what extracurricular activities. So try and see if as the question's being asked, try and do that. Then don't open your mouth immediately and start talking. Your brain, in the same way that when we're going into a room that's dark and suddenly we turn the light on, look at this, we've got a biology graduate to help us with rods and cones in the eye. So when you're in a room which is dark and you're going into a room that's light, your eyes have to adjust from dark to light, and it needs that 2 or 3 seconds to adjust before it can carry on in the light. And it's the same with this. If you're in a dark room and suddenly you go into a light room and you just walk straight in, you'll walk into something. So take those 2 or 3 seconds to allow your brain to process it. And you probably saw that after that, you can do this under the table if you want. I was doing a 1, 2, 3 in terms of, right, I'm going to answer this question with that tip, with that answer, and that answer, and then away you go. So it just allows you to kind of categorize that in your head first, and it allows you to process the question and process an answer. Because I can guarantee you that I probably did this. People are thinking, the reason he took 9 interviews to get his first job wasn't because it was so difficult, it's because answering interviews rubbishly. I can guarantee that if James had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have just launched into an answer on the first bit of it, which was what questions are going to come up. And then I would have forgotten, parts 2 and 3 of the question. I wouldn't have answered them. Whereas you learn over time that by categorizing and then categorizing your answers as well allows you to answer the whole question and make sure that you get maximum marks for that question. So that's a tip. So the first part of it was what questions are going to come up. I'm going to split this into 2. First of all, as a band 5, your interviewer wants to make sure that you are 2 things. Number 1 is safe, and number 2 is competent. So they want to make sure that on day 1, you're safe enough that you're going to support the patient with your handling when you're on the wards, and you're going to remember to check all their lines, and you're going to remember to pick up the catheter, and you're not going to give someone who hasn't walked for 3 weeks a walking stick rather than a relator frame. That's the safety part of things. And the competent is that you'll be able to go in on day 1 and do the job that you need to do. Yes, you'll be able to see 4 MSK patients. It may not be the most amazing assessment in the world, but you'll be able to do it. They need you to be able to say, right, we've got 4 patients on the respiratory ward, and after that we need to help on the other ward. So would you be able to see those 4 patients in the morning? They want to make sure you're competent to do that. So that's the first thing. So in your questions, be safe. If the question is, should I use a stick or a frame? Go for a frame. It's going to be more safe. And then, of course, you can talk about that in time. You're going to progress them onto crutches and progress them onto a stick. So just within your general demeanor, remember that, safe and competent. The second half of my answer to that question, what questions are coming up, is that there are 5 million, billion, gazillion questions that could come up. And we do, here at Clinical Physio, we do consultancy work for people who are having job interviews or revising for this, that, and the other, or doing job applications and things like that. And one of the tips we always teach is don't practice questions, practice answers. So when you get a question, let's pick an interview question. Let's pick something like you've got a 62-year-old male with first onset of lower back pain who has abdominal pain as well as pain running down their leg. What questions do you want to ask? That's a common interview question. What questions do you want to ask? What they're really asking, the genuine question that's being asked there is, do you know your subjective assessment, so that when this patient does come into your clinic, that you'll be able to ask the right questions? So it doesn't mean just focus on the red flag thing. My tip in terms of practice the answer is practice going through your subjective assessment again and again and again. So that regardless of whether it's a low back pain patient with leg pain, whether it's a shoulder pain patient who has a slap tear, whether it's an ankle patient who's got a fracture, you've practiced running through your subjective questions so many times that you're going to be able to adjust it relative to that patient. So you'll be able to say, well, first I'm going to start with the history of present condition, then I'm going to go on to their aggravating factors, then I'm going to go on to their easing factors, then I'm going to talk about the body chart, then I'm going to do night pain, then I'm going to do 24-hour pattern, then I'm going to do special questions, and you can see what I'm doing. So no matter what the question is, I've practiced the answer so many times that I can adjust it, because you'll never be able to guess the question, but you can do your answers. And it's the same therefore for the objective tests. Let's pick a respiratory patient rather than MSK. So you've got a patient on the ward, they're day 2 post lobectomy, and you've come on the ward and they're short of breath. What things do you want to look at? Again, what the basic question there is, can you tell me your objective assessment? So you're going to go through the whole thing like we did with the subjective. We're going to speak to the nursing staff. We're going to make sure that there was no issues. We're going to check the medical notes to see what the last thing was done. We're going to check their observation. You go through this thing. But as a result of practicing the answer so many times that you can recite it step by step in your head, it allows you to answer any question that's going to come up. So hopefully that's a long way of, of answering the first part of that question, which is what questions are going to come up. I suppose that in itself is a tip, and I hope this is a good tip as well. And then in terms of the final aspect of that question, which is what extracurricular stuff do interviewers look for? I'm going to say something that is potentially stereotypical and potentially generalizing. So I apologize to anyone who's doing a job interview who doesn't feel this way, but I know that the clinical stuff and the actual things that the examiner, the interviewer is asking is going to have a heavier weighting than the extracurricular stuff. Don't get me wrong, the extracurricular stuff can be great, but certainly focus on the clinical stuff first. Don't worry if you haven't been on a course in 5 years. Don't worry if you haven't been on a course in the last 6 months to be able to readily throw it out there. That's okay. But I suppose effectively there's two different components of extracurricular stuff that is worthwhile mentioning potentially. One is physiotherapy based. So whether it be that you've listened to some podcasts or you've listened to these people called Clinical Physio who did some webinars, and those webinars helped you shape your practice on this. Linking it back to something clinical, i.e. I listened to a podcast on, this guy called James Armstrong did an interview with Tom Goom, and he talked about some things that you can do for running patients. So how I link that to my practice is by so that you've given context behind your extracurricular activity. I listened to a podcast on the hip, and as a result I've changed my hip examination. I did a course on low back pain, and as a result this is how I've changed my cauda equina questioning. See if you can, if it's something that you can link back to clinical practice, then what it tells that interviewer is that they have that you are a student, or you're a future band 5 physio who adds context to their learning. They don't just play it in the car and just sit and listen to it and then it's finished. You've added something to it. It shows that you're reflective, it shows that you're engaged, it shows that you know how to further your practice, and it shows how to improve on your strengths as a result. So that's one part of extracurricular activities. The second part of extracurricular activities is a work-life balance. And I wouldn't spend 6 minutes talking about this in your interview like I've just have. But if there is a question that comes up about work-life balance, then what your interviewer is asking is that they want to make sure you have resilience. And so it might be a very quick thing to say, I'm involved in sport, or I'm involved in drama, or I'm involved in this charity, or it doesn't have to be anything specific. You don't all have to go and start working in a charity. Something that demonstrates that you have a work-life balance and that you're able to switch off is all that they might be looking for there. So I hope in a long way that answers your question, James.
Not at all. I think that's, well, no, it does. Sorry, no, but not in a long way. I think it's, there's some prominent things there that are really, really important. And having recently, I say recently, it was in January now, having gone through the interview process, I'd say that, 100% all of what you've just said there is key to not just being successful, but also remaining a little bit calm and settled during the interview as well. So I mean, and also to add to what you said there, obviously you've got the clinical physio. I'd also put a link to Generation AHP, our friend Beth, who's got some fab Instagram. I think mainly if you go to the stories, there's some tips in there, because I think there's some good stuff there when Beth was doing that. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for my video on preparing for Band 5 interviews.
Oh yeah, sure, cool.
Link above.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely check out James's video. But I'd also hugely echo to check out Beth on Generation AHP. Beth and I kind of call each other Instagram brothers and sisters. So if you ever see a link there on Instagram, you think, what? She's actually his sister? It's not. It's just it's just something we like to talk about, as it were. No, she's fabulous, and as you said, on her highlights, she's got some fabulous bits on job interview. So definitely check it out.
And that's it, and it's using those resources. But no, back to what you've just been talking about there. I think there are really prominent bits there that I think will really, really help someone going into interview. Definitely.
Do you mind me just mentioning one more thing? You mentioned about feeling calmer.
Yeah.
Which is so important. And if it helps anyone, so there's a rugby player called Sam Warburton, who's an ex-Welsh rugby player, and I saw a little interview with him he was doing on the radio where he said that going into any match, he knew that he had been so prepared that he knew that he was going to be better than his opponent, because he knew that he had done everything he could, and he felt so prepared for it that he felt calmer as a result. And he said there was a lot less pressure because he knew the position we was in. So as a result, if you've got 3 weeks till the interview, then write down a list of things that you want to achieve in the next 3 weeks. Don't make it 6 months worth of work. Make it genuine 3 weeks worth of work. Be realistic with yourself. And if you can honestly tick those things off, then you're prepared. You prepared in the best way that you could. And I hope, as James said, that allows you to bring a calmness to your interview, because you know that you've done things which have put you in the best position to be able to do the interview.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good one. Going in with that game face and that kind of confidence to really rock those interviewers and make them realize how good you are. I suppose another quick one I just want to add there is that I often tell people is they're not there to catch you out either. They're there to kind of find out and drill down to see whether you've got what they need, not to kind of catch you out and see if they can find that you're not good enough. That's not what they're there to do.
Yeah, that's a really great point, James. Really, really great point. And as you said, it just helps you remember that they're there at the end of the day, they want to hire someone.
Yes.
They want and they want someone that they're going to hire who's going to be happy coming to work. They don't want to hire someone who every minute of every day is thinking, oh crikey, I'm under pressure here because they're going to grill me again in a minute. So that's what they want to demonstrate from the interview as well. So accept their offer of an informal talk or an informal walk round when it's out of COVID, an informal chats, and be prepared that when ask at the end, when they say, are there any questions you want to ask us, make sure you have questions that genuinely interest you as a part of that job.
Brilliant. Loads there. God, everyone watching this, you're going to ace that job interview.
I hope so.
So we've got here already, actually. So these are the final questions that I ask everyone, and there is a question that I haven't told you about. So.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So we start with, this is a paper that is perhaps a bit older, that you feel is still important in your clinical practice. And I'll put a link to all of these in the description below. Yeah,
hugely. So I'm going to show you this, which is it's a book. First of all, I'm sorry it's not a paper; it's a book.
All right.
But if you can see the red text on there, that's my annotations from 2011. There. So it goes to show that I've still got it, and that's because it was really, really brilliant for me in terms of making me feel more relaxed about scary low back pain. And we run a course which is called Making Low Back Pain Less Scary for Physiotherapists, and we go into these principles a lot more. So the book is called the Back Pain Revolution. Let me see if I can. Sorry, please excuse me a minute. I'm just bringing up my PowerPoint. Yeah, it's called The Back Pain Revolution by a author called Waddell from 1998. Now, so I suppose, unfortunately, it won't be a Google search. If you've got a library, then check it out. And basically, there's a section which is chapter 2 on diagnostic triage. And just to very quickly explain it, it kind of separates low back pain into one of 3 categories. Category 1 being simple low back pain, category 2 being nerve root pain, and category 3 being possible serious spinal pathology. But the way that it describes those different categories, and it's something that we expand on the course, made huge sense to me when I was a band 5, and really helped me. There are some papers, actually, I say there's no papers. There are some papers that have expanded on this, and I'm just bringing up my screen to be able to say them to you. So one of them is called Acute Low Back Pain Beyond Drug Therapies. And that is by O'Sullivan and Lynn from 2014. And there is another one called Diagnostic Triage for Low Back Pain, a Practical Approach for Primary Care. And that is by Bardin, King, and Mayer from 2017. So those might be some papers which expand on the book if you can't get your hands on the book. And as I said, those different things are things that really helped me as a band 5, and I sincerely hope they do for you too.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, we'll put the link, if we can find a link to the book, I'll put that in below, and then we'll get links for those papers as well. I know the O'Sullivan paper, I've read that. It's definitely worth it, and it would link quite well. So then
sorry, the two papers there are ever so slightly different to the book, but they kind of go on the same premise of 3 categories and involving on those categories, which helped me. So there you go.
It's always nice to categorize things. I think as students, we always want to pigeonhole. Sometimes feeds that well. So then we flip that on its side and we say a recent paper that that's changed or influenced your practice.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one, because for me, it's really interesting for me because working in A&E, working in my consultant clinic, ACL injuries are something that I love, and ACL injuries are something that I spend a lot of my time thinking about as a result. And there's a lot of topics these days based on whether or not someone should have conservative management after an ACL injury, and whether someone should have surgical management following an ACL injury. And the first thing to say is that it's not an easy answer. It's not always black and white. Sometimes it is, but it's not always black and white. Okay. And I know that there's been studies by people like Frobel coming out from Sweden, that there's a growing evidence to support more conservative rehab for ACL injuries within physiotherapy. And don't get me wrong, there is a place for it, absolutely. But I suppose that if I can introduce you a little bit into the consultant world, I'm not a consultant, I'm not an orthopedic consultant, I am lucky enough to work with one, and I know that he's a surgeon, but he's a great surgeon, and one of the things he always taught me from the beginning is that a good consultant knows when to operate. A really good consultant knows when not to operate. Okay, so I want to kind of reassure you that he's not right, anyone who walks in, we're getting the scalpel out and we're going to cut them open. That's not the case at all. He's a very thoughtful, very holistic consultant. But one thing that he does have a particular affinity for is the importance of, when someone is planning to go back to higher level sport, about really considering, do they need to have an ACL reconstruction? Because if they don't have an ACL reconstruction, is the remaining instability there going to lead to further injuries? And Frobel and his group touched upon that, and I think did some evidence on it. But there's the paper I'm just going to read my notes from, if you don't mind. Oh, actually, it's also on my phone, so I'm not checking my WhatsApp, I'm checking my phone for the reference.
Just while you're doing that, I just want to point out all students the fact that you're doing what you're doing, that it's not a necessity to have everything up here all of the time, because so many times students experience clinicians and you have to reel off papers, and actual fact, you don't need to. It's fine to have it written down.
Definitely, 100%.
Really nice.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. So, so the paper is called "Secondary Meniscal Tears in Patients with Anterior Cruciate Ligament Injury," and it looks at these patients over an 18-year follow-up, which is really cool. It's by a group, a large group out of the Mayo Clinic, which is a very famous clinic in the USA, by a group. The authors are Hagmaier et al. So Hagmaier is Hagmeijer, and it was published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, 2019. And basically, the key line that I'm going to give you from this is that of 1,398 primary ACL injuries, the overall rate of secondary meniscal tears was 16%. So when people have ACL injuries, the chances of them getting a secondary meniscal tear from the fact that they have a much more compromised stability at their knee, which leaves them much more vulnerable to different injuries. Meniscal tears is 16%, which is actually quite high. And the knock-on effect of this is that person is going to need more surgery. But if and we had a case of this recently in my consultant clinic, someone who had an ACL injury a while ago, and then had a recent injury, which was a meniscal tear, and it was an irreparable meniscal repair. Couldn't repair it. So they would have just, I think they kind of walked out not having surgery at all because of the fact that the meniscal repair was irreparable. And if you completely take away the meniscus, then they're going to have no meniscus. And for a 30-year-old, that's a problem because over the years, they're going to develop degenerative changes. And that's a real life case. So the possibility of that is high. So the second part of of the results from this paper is significantly lower rates of secondary meniscal tears were noted among patients undergoing acute ACL reconstruction within 6 months of their injury. And the principle behind this is that this is a particular paper that looked at patients over an 18 years period. And it's one of the biggest things. And Frobel et al., I'm mentioning them so many times because they've done a lot of research into conservative management of ACLs, and their papers have often demonstrated that degenerative change, the rate of degenerative change, if you don't have an ACL reconstruction, is not as big as we initially thought. We initially thought, right, someone has an ACL injury, they tear their ACL, they don't have surgery, that means everything's going to be rubbing around, and by the age of 45, they're going to have a total knee replacement. And they kind of said, no, that's not the case. Here's the evidence to back that up. Mm-hmm. But for me, there's a different school of thought here, which is not degenerative changes. It's what if they have another massive knee injury by going back to football and getting a tackle from here, there, and there, and they're more vulnerable as a result, they get something like a secondary meniscal tear. And, as I've pointed out through this case, it can be irreparable. And there's a very different consequence as a result of that. Mm-hmm. So, have a look into that if you're interested in ACLs.
That's really, really interesting. And what I love about that is it highlights something that I've only realized maybe in the third year, when you become a bit more critical thinking in terms of papers and what you see and hear. And you get, again, I'm going to go back to social media, you get these blanket things that you hear about that actually conservative management of the knee is better than surgery, et cetera, which we know, in most cases, but it's about the patient. And what we're talking about here, we're talking about patients that take them as an individual, are at a higher risk due to their age and sport that they play or the level that they're doing things of that future problem. So it's about the patient, and you always got to think that, always remember that. So I that's really good. Yeah.
Well done. No, well summarized. Well summarized.
Okay, so this one here, so this is a nice one. If physiotherapy wasn't an option for you, what career do you think you may have, or what career would you have liked to have had?
Yeah, true story. Here's a true story for you. The end of my first year of a student, I was becoming slightly disillusioned. I don't know why, but I was becoming slightly disillusioned. I don't know what it was. But anyway, my reason for, and I'm sure it's the same for many people, my reason for first getting into physio was that I love football. And when I was younger, when I was in my teenage years, I was an assistant football coach. And I loved being, there and seeing, right, someone's gone injured playing football. What's happening? What's going on? Oh, it's their knee. Oh, it's swollen. I loved that. And I think that's part of what prompted me to get into physiotherapy. I was getting a bit disillusioned at the end of my first year, and I went and did a level 1 coaching course to be a football manager.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I went and did it. I went and did level 1. Level 1 is basic. Level 1 in the FA coaching courses allows you, is kind of there to teach you how to teach a group of maybe 10 to 15 junior footballers between the ages of 12 and 18, for example. And there's much more stages after that. But yeah, I was going to be a football manager in my own mind. And I remember going on the course and kind of saying, one of the questions that came up was, if you aren't involved in football, i.e., if you don't know anyone in football, what are the chances of you becoming a top level manager? And the guy, I remember the guy being honest and saying, I've got to be honest with you, it's quite slim. There are people that will. Jose Mourinho was a translator. He started his career in football by being, he wasn't a player or he wasn't a massively successful footballer. So he was a translator at Barcelona. And so that's how he was involved in the coaching setup. And then he went on to become an incredible football coach. But yeah, I think for me, it was going to be something involved in football. Up until the age of 18, I was in Bahrain. I was in the Middle East. The level of the quality of football isn't as high as it is here in the UK. And when I was in sixth form, I was still convinced that I was going to be a professional footballer. My dreams got quashed one day when my PE teacher, who's from the UK, said, "I'm sorry, no offense, but that's not going to happen." And I was shocked. I thought, "What do you mean it's not going to happen? I'm the best I'm captain of my school, this, that, and the other." But that wasn't the case. But I'm glad that he did quash my dreams, because if not, I'd be here still as a 33-year-old thinking that I'd still have a chance to be a professional footballer. It was going to be either that, or, as you can tell, I talk a lot. So my other thing was going to be, I was going to be a football commentator. So something involved in football. You never know. Maybe one day I will be involved in football in some capacity. But yeah, interesting. I don't think I'm going to be involved as a football physio. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of demands in football physios, and some people thrive on that. Good for them. But I don't think it was for me.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So next one is, if you could, this is why I don't think you've had this one. So if you could be anywhere in the world whilst teaching a webinar online, where would it be?
Yeah, that's what a cool question. I'll be really honest with you, actually. I could say Barbados. I could say the Maldives or something like that. But the honest answer is probably Bahrain, which is where my dad's side of the family's from. And I hope I can give you a bit of an insight into it here. Is that for me personally, I don't live in Bahrain. I don't live with my dad's side of the family. My mum's side of the family is here in the UK, but my dad's side of the family is all in the Middle East. And I do miss it. And one of the great opportunities with clinical physio is that if we can do webinars, you can do it from all over the world, as you've highlighted with your question. And to me, one of the big reasons behind doing clinical physio was to hopefully one day be less tied down to a job where I was working 5 days a week. If anyone, by the way, if anyone out there is someone who wants to try and open up to different options in life and kind of think, I'm destined for a job for the next 50 years and I'm going to be working 5 days a week. I'm not one of those people. I couldn't do that. So the honest answer is to be, hopefully it's a realistic answer that, one day I'll be able to go out to Bahrain for 3 weeks and not worry about the fact that I haven't got enough annual leave and be able to do that. So I can be with my family, but run a webinar at night, or run a webinar 5 days a week at night, or something like that. And even if they're all free, it doesn't matter. That the opportunity to be able to do that is a big thing for me. So it's a quite simple answer, but that's the truth.
I think that's a lovely answer. I think nothing simple about that. And well, sometimes the simple things are the best things, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And then the final one is this is one that always excites me the most, is you're going to recommend us something. It can be anything, a book, an experience, a course, a film, a life hack.
Cool.
We've had some interesting ones so far, so no pressure.
No, that's fine. So when I was a student or a junior, and even now, everyone talks about CPD, which is continuing professional development. But I'm gonna potentially risk it here and suggest that you might, James, be a fan of not the particular book that I'm going to talk about, but of the kind of genre of personal development, which is something that's come to me in the last 4 or 5 years. Don't worry, I'm not getting my crystal ball out. I'm not getting crystals out. I'm not, doing some hocus pocus and I'm going to throw it on you. But personal development is something that's come to me quite big in the last few years, which is more about developing yourself as an individual, whether that be in your mindset, in your motivation, in your goal setting, and how that kind of creates life. And I think one of the biggest things of growing clinical physio, one of the biggest reasons that we've been able to do it is because we've all got goals and we've all got aims and we've got genuine passion for what we're doing and helping people. And for me personally, personal development is one of those things that's allowed me to do that. I think a lot of the stuff we talk about that we were talking about earlier in terms of not comparing yourself to other people, and to not feel not judging yourself, which is effectively the thing when you're kind of saying, well, everyone else is doing it, I'm not doing it. You're effectively judging yourself, and so personal development goes a lot into that. And I suppose I've always been a positive and optimistic person, but the importance of happiness is something that I haven't expanded on as much until I listened to this audiobook. You can get it as an audiobook or as a book. And it's by an incredible lady called Jen Sincero, which is Jen, and then her surname is Sincero. And the title of the book or audiobook is You Are a Badass. All right. And it's a great way of getting into personal development if you want to. And to give you a very quick background of the book, Jen is I don't know her personally, I wish I did, but I say Jen. The author, Jen Sincero, is someone who in the beginning of the book explains how her life was, as many of these kind of things are, that she was a completely different person, really unhappy, no optimism, no goals, no thoughts for the future, no control of her own life in the way that she described it. And then through a series of things, she grew to change that mindset and has seen and gained happiness in lots of different ways, and a very different perspective on life than she used to. So if personal development sounds like it's something you want to get into, then check out Jen.
Brilliant. And that's a really something a bit different, because we've talked a lot about clinical physio, as you say, professional stuff, and actually I'm a big believer, I think you alluded to there, is you can't have all of that going on if you as a person aren't personally kind of in the right place. And again, I don't mean that hocus pocus and area. I mean that kind of realistically. And I think as students, that's really, really prominent right now and all the time. And I know at university we do talk about that. Our lecturers are quite keen on making sure that we've got that balance and that we are, we look after ourselves, and that's quite nice. And sometimes you need a helping hand with that as well. So developing it and having an active part to play in developing yourself personally is important. So we'll put a link to that book and the audio version down below as well.
I listened to the audio, and the reason for that is Jen's hilarious, and actually hearing her voice do it is brilliant. So I personally listened to the audio rather than read the book, and it was fab.
Okay, that's great. Wonderful. Okay, that's everything. I think we've covered loads there. Thank you ever so much for all of your time, Khalid. It has been a really interesting chat. Really.
Pleasure. No, thank you so much for having me on. It's people over. I think the word privilege and is sometimes overused, but it's a genuine privilege to be involved in these kind of circles and to be able to give something back. Genuinely love it. So thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to try and share.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much, Khalid. and we'll speak soon. Cheers.
Take care. Thanks, James.